studied how national income is calculated in an economy by the three different methods: income method, expenditure method, and product method. In order to understand whether the calculated national income is the equilibrium level of income in an economy, we have to understand aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Because equilibrium level of income is determined by these two forces, aggregate demand and aggregate supply. This theory is developed by John Maynard Keynes. Keynes says that equilibrium level of income in an economy is determined at the point where aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. Then what is aggregate demand? Aggregate demand is the total demand for goods and services in an economy. It is the total money spent for purchasing different goods in an economy. In that sense, aggregate demand is equal to the total expenditure in an economy. Aggregate demand is moving in the same direction with income. As income increases, aggregate demand also increases. Now, let us see what are the components of aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is having four components in a four-sector economy. The first one is private consumption demand. It is the total money incurred by all the consumers for purchasing different goods. For example, consumers spend money for food, clothing, or in order to purchase furniture, buy books. They are spending money for different items. The sum total of all these expenditure constitute the private consumption demand or private consumption expenditure. Consumption expenditure is moving in the same direction with that of the income. When income increases, consumption also increases. So, income and consumption moving in the same direction. The second component of aggregate demand is investment demand. It is the total money spent on the purchase of capital goods like machinery, plant, equipments, etc. Investment decision is depending on the rate of interest and the marginal efficiency of capital. What is marginal efficiency of capital? It is the expected profitability from a new investment. Rate of interest and investment, these are moving in the opposite direction. When rate of interest is very high, investment will be very low, and vice versa. There are two types of investment: autonomous investment and induced investment. Autonomous investment, which is not influenced by profit motive and it is not having any relations with income. Usually, this investment is made by the government for ensuring the welfare of the nation. The second one is induced investment. It is induced by profit. Mainly, this investment is made by the private individuals. So, the second component of aggregate demand is investment demand. Third component of aggregate demand is the government demand for final goods and services. In an economy, government also spend money for purchasing various goods and services to ensure the welfare of the people. Governmental decision on spending is depending on the fiscal policy of the government. And the last component of aggregate demand is the net export. Fourth component of aggregate demand is the net export. The fourth component of aggregate demand is net export. Net export is the difference between export and import. Export is denoted by X and import by the letter M. So, net export is equal to X minus M. Export is the expenditure of foreigners on Indian goods, and import is the expenditure incurred by Indian people on foreign goods. The difference between these two is the net export. So, aggregate demand in a four-sector economy is having four components. The first one you have already studied, private consumption demand. Second one, investment demand. Third, government expenditure on final goods and services. And fourth one is net export. So, we can write the components of aggregate demand like this. Aggregate demand AD is equal to private consumption demand denoted by C plus investment demand I plus government expenditure G plus X minus M. These are the four components of aggregate demand in a four-sector model. Whereas in a two-sector economy, aggregate demand is having only two components. The two-sector economy comprises private sector and the production sector. Only two sectors are there. Accordingly, aggregate demand is having only two components. First one is consumption demand, second one is investment demand. Keynes considers this concept of aggregate demand to explain his theory of income, equilibrium level of income. So let us summarize. What you have learned now is the meaning of aggregate demand. It is the total money spent on the purchase of final goods and services. It is having four components. First one is private consumption demand, second investment demand, third one is government demand on final goods and services or government expenditure, fourth one is net export. Now let us study the aggregate demand concept with the help of a table and a diagram. Income level, in the first column it is denoted by Y, second consumption, C, third investment, denoted by the letter I, and in the last column aggregate demand is equal to C plus I. I have already said to you that in order to determine the equilibrium level of income, we are considering only two components for aggregate demand, which are the consumption demand and investment demand. The level of income, the beginning level, income level is 0. Let us assume that first level of income is 0. But people need certain money to buy the necessaries of life. So, consumption cannot be 0. Consumption at 0 level of income is 50 rupees. Investment, Keynes in his theory assumed that investment in the short period is the autonomous investment. And it remains constant at all levels of income. So, the investment is 100 rupees. What is aggregate demand? Aggregate demand is the sum total of consumption expenditure and investment expenditure. So, what is the consumption expenditure here? It is 50 and investment expenditure it is 100. So, aggregate demand at this first level is 150 rupees. Income increased, became 50. This income is not enough to buy all the necessaries of life. So they spend, people in an economy, they spend 75 rupees. Investment remains the same, 100 rupees. So aggregate demand at this level of income is 175 rupees. Again, there is increase in income. Now the income is 100 rupees. And the economy spend the full 100 rupees, the full total amount of 100 rupees for purchasing consumption goods. So, consumption here is for 100 rupees, investment also 100. So, aggregate demand at this level is also 200 rupees. income increased to 200 rupees. Here the consumption also increases. We have already studied that consumption increases with the level of income. Here we can see one feature. There is 100% increase in income, but the percentage increase in consumption is less than the percentage increase in income. That means after reaching a particular level of consumption, people have a tendency to save more. That means the extra amount, now the income is 200 rupees, they are spending only 150 rupees for consumption goods, and here the investment is 100 rupees. So aggregate demand in this situation is income again increased, now it became 300 rupees. Consumption also increased, investment remains the same. Aggregate demand, that is the sum total of consumption expenditure and investment expenditure, became 300. 400 is the income, 250 rupees spent for consumption goods, investment 100 rupees, aggregate demand 350. From this table, it is very clear that income is going on increasing, consumption level also increases. There is a direct relationship between income and consumption. So aggregate demand is also having a positive relations with the income. As income increases, aggregate demand is also increases. Now we can explain this table with the help of a diagram. X-axis represents income level. On the y-axis, we measure consumption, investment and aggregate demand. From the table, it is very clear that investment remains the same at all levels of income. So the constant investment is represented by a horizontal line parallel to x-axis. So I is the investment curve in the diagram. C is the consumption curve. It starts from y-axis. What is the meaning why it starts from y-axis? Because at zero level of income, some amount of money is required to buy the necessaries of life. So the consumption curve starts from a point on y-axis, starts from point C. Consumption curve is having an upward slope. What is the meaning behind this tendency? Because consumption and income positively related. These two concepts are positively related. When there is increase in income, consumption also increases. The next curve, the aggregate demand curve, also starts from y-axis. Aggregate demand is the sum total of consumption expenditure and investment expenditure. Starts from y-axis. Even at zero level of income, aggregate demand, that means total spending is there for buying various necessaries of life. That's why that curve is also start from y-axis. Actually, the consumption curve and the aggregate demand curve, both curves are parallel to each other. The difference between these two is the autonomous investment. Children, we have already studied that. The different components of aggregate demand. In a 4-sector model, it is having 4 components: consumption demand, investment demand, government demand on final goods and services, and net export. Whereas in a 2-sector model, it is having only 2 components: consumption expenditure and investment expenditure. I have already said to you, the equilibrium level of income in an economy is determined by the 2 forces of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. What is aggregate supply? Aggregate supply is the value of final goods and services supplied in an economy. the money value of the output, it is distributed among the 4 factors of production, because the output is the result of the combined efforts of the 4 factors of production. Which are the 4 factors of production? Land, labor, capital and organization. The money value of the output, the total output in an economy, is distributed among the 4 factors of production. So, the money value of the total output is equal to the total income received by the factors of production in an economy. In that sense, aggregate supply is equal to the total income in an economy. Total income in an economy is the national income or net national product at factor cost. It is the sum total of the factor income earned by all the factors in an economy. Some portion of the income, the people, the owners of the factors of production, they spend a major portion of their income for purchasing consumption goods, and the rest of the income they are saving. So, aggregate supply is having 2 components. Aggregate supply is equal to income level. I think it is clear. Aggregate supply means it is the total value of all goods and services circulated in an economy. It is equal to the total income, because the value of money value of the output is distributed among the 4 factors of production, because the total output is the result of the combined effort of the 4 factors of production. After receiving income, major portion they are used for consumption and the remaining amount they have saved. So, Y is equal to C plus S, or aggregate supply is having only 2 components, consumption expenditure and saving expenditure. So, aggregate supply is equal to income, that is equal to consumption plus saving. Consumption, you have already studied that consumption is having a positive relation with income. As income increases, consumption also increases. Saving is also the function of income. That means when income increases, saving also increases. So we can write like this: consumption is equal to function of income. Likewise, saving is also a function of income. Okay, aggregate supply is having only 2 components, consumption expenditure and saving. The concept of aggregate supply can be explained with the help of a table and diagram. Income level is given in the first column. What is the first component of aggregate supply? It is consumption. Consumption is given in the second column. Saving is the second component of aggregate supply. And the last one is aggregate supply. It is the sum total of consumption and saving. The initial level of income, 0 level of income. We have already seen that even at 0 level of income, people need some money to buy the necessities of life. So the consumption at this level of income is 50 rupees. There is no saving. There is no saving, actually de-saving. Actually, people meet this consumption expenditure from their past saving. So, at this 0 level of income, minus 50 is the saving, de-saving. This concept is known as de-saving. Aggregate supply is the sum total of consumption and saving. So, 50 plus minus 50, aggregate supply here is 0. Second level of income, 50 rupees. Consumption is for 75 rupees. minus 25 is the saving, because consumption is greater than income. Income is only 50 rupees and the consumption is 75 rupees. That means consumption is greater than income. Minus 25 is the saving. Aggregate supply is the sum total of consumption, expenditure and saving. So 75 plus minus 25 is equal to 50. Then income increased to 100 rupees. The full amount is spent for consumption. There is no saving. 0 is the saving here. Aggregate supply is the sum total of consumption and saving. So 100 plus 0 is equal to 100. ₹150 is the consumption now. The remaining amount is for saving, that is 50 rupees. By adding these two columns, we get aggregate supply as 200. Out of the 300 rupees, 200 rupees spent for consumption, remaining 100 rupees people saved. The total of aggregate supply 200 plus 100 is equal to 300. Again there is increase in income, consumption also increase, saving is also going on increasing. So from this table it is clear that when income increases, consumption also increases. Saving is also increases with the income. That means income and consumption is positively related, income and saving is also positively related. What you have learned now is the meaning of aggregate supply. It is the total value of goods and services circulated in the economy. Aggregate supply is having two components, consumption, expenditure and saving. We can represent this table with the help of a diagram. Income is measured on x-axis, consumption and saving are measured on y-axis. C is the consumption curve which starts from y-axis. Due to the presence of consumption expenditure at zero level of income. Consumption is a function of income. S is the saving curve. It starts from the negative segment of y-axis because of negative saving or dissaving at the initial levels of income. AS is the aggregate supply curve. Every point on the AS curve is equidistant from x-axis and y-axis, implying that aggregate supply is equal to consumption plus saving. So children, there are two forces behind the determination of equilibrium level of income in an economy, which are the aggregate demand and aggregate supply.